I've been driving motorcycles all my life. It was a part of my life, a big part of my life. I was a computer guy. I was in business with my brother, and so that was an important part. And I had two young children who I definitely focused on. But when I wasn't in those two realms, riding all over the country in my Harley Davidson, that's what I really like to do. I mean, it really was a passion of mine. Yeah, and so what happened was I got to the intersection just when I got there. Someone made a left-hand turn and T-boned me, just hit me square on the Harley. And I mean, for me, like the lights went out. I had no idea what happened. And then for to the rest of the world, for the next month, I was laying in a hospital bed. But in myself, in my own mind, where I was a place that I've come to call the place between here and there. And it's not a place, certainly not here. And I don't think it's like where you go when you pass. It felt to me like an in-between place, kind of like what Catholics may call purgatory, but it wasn't a place of punishment or of, it wasn't like that. It was like a place of learning. And what I've come to believe it was kind of like perhaps when you pass is that you go through a process, both a physical process and a spiritual process. And the spiritual process is perhaps to have you come to terms with your life and the things you've learned and prepare you for passing into spirit. That perhaps it's not just a switch. One second you're alive, the next second you're in another place.
I just want to get a sense of what to imagine. Was there something you were seeing or feeling when you were in this place?
Exactly the opposite. It's felt no different. I felt no different than life because I didn't remember anything about the accident. And I immediately found myself in like a work-like situation. And so it really didn't seem, it wasn't until the very end that I noticed that it really hit me that something was going on here that wasn't part of my regular life, that I really had to come to terms with what was going on.
So it was kind of just like waking up at work.
Exactly. Like I didn't have control over what I did, like meaning like the experiences that I was to have, but I had free will with inside that experience. Is that I didn't sleep, I didn't eat, I didn't go to the bathroom, it wasn't anything like that. I didn't have control. Like I wasn't walking in buildings and down streets or anything like that, unless that was part of the experience. But it wasn't part of like a regular life like you would experience now that you do things, you'd go places. It wasn't like that. I was presented with an experience that I had to learn from. And as long as I kept on having the experience and learning from the experience, it continued. When I stopped learning from the experience and growing, that's when I would go to the next experience.
Wow. Okay, so what was the first experience you learned from?
The first experience was how to sense energy or the soul, the spirit, that energy inside of each of us. Like, do you come across people in your regular life like, wow, they have good energy, or wow, that's a little creepy. Like people have a
Definitely.
yeah, people have a sense of that. And but there I was taught really to understand and feel that energy. And the way it was first presented to me, like we were sharing before, is that I was in a work-like situation that seemed no different than my regular life. And I was dealing with a gentleman who I hadn't seen in 20 years. But he made an impression on me in life, is that he was from Haiti and he spoke kind of French, kind of English, and he combined it into like this language. I guess it's called the Creole language. And sometimes he couldn't communicate, so he would do these exaggerated gestures and facial movements and hand movements and things like that to kind of get his point across. And that was very instrumental because that I hadn't recognized him because it was 20 years until he started to talk. And I was like, hey, aren't you so and so? And he would smile and say yes. And we would just go about our business. Then I saw him again and he looked like an old man. And at first I didn't understand who he was. But then I saw one of those gestures or one of the things he would say, and I would say, hey, aren't you so and so? And he'd say, oh, yeah, you got me. And that was very strange. And then the game was on, is that he appeared to me in every shape or size you could possibly imagine. He appeared to me as a man. He appeared to me as a woman. He appeared to me as a Asian person or an African person, or he was tall, he was short, he was all different types of things. And at first, I relied so much on his mannerisms and the way he talked and stuff. But after a while, I started to like sense that energy we were talking about. And more and more as time went on, like I didn't get it at first. So it went on for a long time. But once I started to tune into that energy, my understanding came very quickly is that all of a sudden, more and more each time I would meet him in his new disguise, I would know who he was right away because I wouldn't count on the mannerisms. I'd count on me recognizing his energy. It got to the point like I didn't even have to see him. He could just be anywhere near me and I knew he was there. And that's when I began to realize about energy is that we all have that energy, our soul, our spirit that is unique to us that could be sensed by others. And but it is unique to you, but there's a commonness amongst that energy that everybody shares. Everybody. We all have our own unique energy, and that's part of a greater energy. And the best analogy I could think of is think of cells in your body. You have trillions and trillions of cells in your body, and not one of those cells know anything about you. Each one of those cells has its own life, its own purpose, but all those cells together make up you and your consciousness. And that's when I began to understand about the energy that we share is that all of us together have our own sense of being, but we make up a greater consciousness. And when I looked around me, I saw that energy in everything, whether it was animals, plants, even the stars, even groups of people have energy. It's smells have energy, visions have energy because they all come from sources. And that's when I began to understand that perhaps, perhaps, that the creator and the creation are one, that perhaps God and we are one, that perhaps our purpose here is to learn and grow, and through our learning and growing, the consciousness of the creator and the creation learns and grows. And that could be the purpose of why we're here, is to be able to raise our awareness, raise our understandings, make the mistakes that we couldn't make as part of our higher selves and to learn from that. Not only learn from that in the here and now, but your experiences and your awareness is the only thing that you can take with you.
That's very true. Wow, and you mentioned you felt energy from things like plants or stars, things like that. Was the energy similar to human energy, or was it kind of classified through a different system?
That's a very good question. And the answer is that all the energy has a commonness, but it's unique to every source, whether it's a person or persons or animals or planets. And every energy was different, and it all had to do about the awareness of that energy. And what I sensed in myself, the energy of a planet or a plant or a star is very different than your energy because you have a certain awareness. And and but there was a commonness to it, but it was definitely different. The energy was different. And I found that one of the greatest things about that energy is that, and this is where science and spirit, I believe, tell the very same thing, is that, you think of science, they call it the Big Bang or the Great Expansion, that perhaps we come from a single source and that was created the universe. And well, spirit says the same thing. There was nothingness and then there was life. And so if you take a rock and put it out in outer space and give it the proper circumstances, you come back 4 billion years later, you will see life there. And I'm not talking about pond scum. I'm talking about life. I'm talking about with their own Gandhis and their own Pol Pots and their own, fusion energy is going to be 20 years in the future. You are going to see real life like we know it. And scientists will say that's chemicals and it comes together and it creates life. And spiritualists will say, no, that's proof that everything has an energy, a life force energy, and just give it enough time in the right circumstances, it will learn and grow. And that's kind of like my experience in that place is that I was given these circumstances to learn and grow. So there's just a long answer to your short question is that yes, everything has its own energy. It is unique to the individual, it's unique to the setting, but all together, we make up a greater
I
consciousness.
love that. I love that there's something that unifies all of our own energies, yet we still maintain that uniqueness that makes us
Us,
individuals, I suppose. Yeah.
us. The very purpose of life is for us to learn and grow as individuals. And that's actually what I began to learn next, because that when I was given this understanding of seeing energy and sensing energy, then I went through what I later learned was a life review. But I didn't go through it just once. I went through it a lot closer to a million times than to one, because that as I reviewed my life over and over again, is one thing is that I each time I went through my life, by the time I was done with it, my awareness had grown. And so I was able to review my life again with that new awareness and get more out of it, have a better understanding. And now I could see and sense energy in everything around me. So every situation took on a new meaning, like I got more out of it and I had a deeper understanding of what was going on. And, but it wasn't like a set of eyes, like I'm standing there and I'm watching my life. It wasn't like a Christmas carol with the ghost of Christmas past. And, no, it wasn't like that. It was like I was everywhere. I don't know how to explain it, but I saw everything. I felt everything. It just wasn't from one perspective, and I understood what people were thinking. I understood that there was a physical reason why people were experiencing things and that there was a spiritual reason why people were experiencing things. And so as I began to work through these things, my awareness changed. And one of the most important things I learned there, that some of the most difficult experiences you have in life, some of the heartbreaking things, it's not like I had a bad life. It's just that everybody goes through these things. It's part of life. But those very difficult things, there, when I resolved them, that's when I received the most bliss and the most understanding, because that as I resolved them, all of a sudden I would feel this weight lifted from me. It's not like I saw, pretty flowers or beautiful sunsets or even Jesus or departed relatives. But what brought me the bliss was resolving some of the traumas in life, perhaps some of the hate or animosity or jealousy or regret or shame that I had for myself or for other people. Because as I went over things, I learned that I had blockages that prevented me from properly understanding things. Like if I think of something that I did was that I was very shameful of, the shame would be too great and I wouldn't want to think it through anymore. But having to face that time and time and time again, eventually I was able to let it go and be able to dive in deeper and understanding it with a new set of eyes, which completely changed everything. Like, take for example, if you're bit by a dog when you're a young child, you might be afraid of dogs all your life and never get to have the happiness of a puppy. But but if you revisit it as an adult, maybe someone at 30 or 40 years old who's had some life experience, you might be able to say, hey, wait a second. I could tell the difference between a nasty dog and a pleasant dog. And so I know how to behave differently. And so I love dogs now. And you see, that's what that life review did. It gave me the ability to look at those things that had happened and with a fresh set of eyes, free from any shame or animosity. And that taught me so much, especially here in the here and now, because I am constantly doing life reviews. If I can't look back at myself 6 months ago and think what a jerk I was, it means I wasn't learning and growing. And it's really true. And another thing that it really taught me is not to have hate or animosity towards myself or other people. Because, like, if I do something wrong, I don't feel shame for it. I don't. It's not because I'm psychopathic. It's because that I do things with the best intentions and with knowledge and wisdom of my experience. If I make a terrible mistake, I realize it and I understand it and I try to learn from it so I won't make that mistake again and I would raise my awareness. And that's the key. But I also feel that way about other people is that when other people do things to me or I feel I'm wrong, their stuff, I don't let people do it. But if it occurs, I don't carry it with me to the grave, is that I learn and I grow from it and I don't have hate or animosity towards others. And that was one of the real takeaways from that life review situation.
Wow. I'm I would love to ask you now about one of the moments from your life that happened before the NDE. You witnessed a fatal car accident, and you tell me how you reviewed that through your life review?
Well, what had happened about 10 years before, I had I had my near fatal motorcycle accident. I witnessed this crazy accident where a gentleman was driving a pickup truck the wrong way on the highway, and he went head on right into a limousine carrying a young lady and a family. And the young lady was killed as well as the gentleman who was driving the limousine. They were coming home from a wedding and, they didn't want to drink and drive. And so they were really, doing everything right. And there were allegations that this gentleman had been drinking. And when I first saw this gentleman as I was riding my Harley Davidson, he was right next to me. And I was in shock. Like I didn't know what I was seeing, what I was seeing. It was crazy. And there was construction around. I thought it was maybe a construction vehicle or something. And the next thing is I know he went underneath a bridge and just crashed. There was a loud boom and parts went all over the place. And I was a witness in the trial, and I was on the stand for 2 days, and and I just wanted to bear honest witness to the truth. But I saw that fellow who was accused of this terrible crime. He was just a young kid. He didn't have any malice in his heart. He just made a terrible, terrible mistake. And I understood he had to be held accountable for that, but I didn't see him as an evil person. But likewise, the parents of the young child, they were gravely injured and they were very bitter, and rightly so. They've lost a daughter, and it was just such a horrible thing, but they it destroyed them. At least I from at least at that time, their family was in ruins and they were so bitter. And even at the judge, there was no way anything that they could have done to that young man could have brought them any peace. They absolutely needed time. And that stuck with me. I mean, it really did. And I thought of it over and over again. And it's those types of things are the things that you would experience in a life review. I mean, that's really critical. And so it's those types of experiences, and we'll share a little bit later where I learned from that. But but it's those types of moments that really are the most difficult for you because you're torn between two dichotomies. Like, what's the right answer? You have a family that's absolutely destroyed by the actions of this young man, but a young man who didn't intend that. Like how do you resolve that? And those are the things that I had to learn in that place, or at least become prepared for it, because my near death experience was part of just a greater experience. Like it was preparing me to understand what had happened there in that accident, and then it helped prepare me of what was yet to come. And that was really critical. And I I'm just so grateful for the experience.
I definitely want to ask you about what was to come when we get there too, because I know that that life review informed a lot of your future then. I want to ask, you're the only person I've interviewed who's gone through a life review multiple times. So, what were you learning on the first review versus, say, the 1,000th review?
Zero. I was learning zero on the first because I was right about everything
Okay.
and I understood everything. And that was really the key is that that's why it moved so slowly at first. I didn't understand what I was experiencing. And and but when I started to utilize what I learned about sensing spirit and things, then all of a sudden, this at first the story was boring. Like after the first 100 times, I wasn't learning anything. But once I started to get it, it's not like someone was standing there telling me, "Oh, Steve, you have to learn this." It wasn't like that. It was like I was left with all the time in the universe, and if I want to sit there over and over again and not addressing anything, that would have been forever for me. And that was it. That was the key is that I didn't learn anything at first, but once I started to get what was going on, I approached each life experience, each life review with an eager anticipation because I knew it would be a tough day. No, it really would be a tough day that I would have to face some really hard things. But I knew at the end of it, if I did face those things, I would feel bliss. I would feel this weight off me. Because imagine, if you had no shame or regret for anything that you've done in your life and you have no hate or animosity towards anybody else, like it's just such a weight, it's such a freedom, it's such a peaceful state of mind. And that's what it eventually became. But at first, like I was starting from a dead start. I had no idea what I was experiencing and what I was supposed to learn.
Wow, yeah, I can't imagine reviewing my life once, but so many times, I feel like that would be such a mind-boggling experience.
Is that here time is like you have appointments in the future. You can cook, you can see the water boil. You have interactions. It's different. In that other place, time didn't move at all unless you were learning and growing. And what I mean by that is just the process of you growing. Like, how did you learn? How did your awareness grow? Is through certain experiences and understandings that you had, and that would happen one after another in sequence, and that would give you the illusion, perhaps, of time passing. But if you weren't learning, things went so slow, and it was almost painfully slow, and that really drove the your willingness to learn, but also once you learned and you were overcoming whatever situation, you received such a sense of bliss. And that really drove me. That understanding when I resolved things and felt that bliss, that was the reward.
Okay, so what was the next experience you had on this other side, this place between here and there?
The next experience I had was what I would call what I've later begun to understand is a test. I was tested. And what I was presented with a group of young adults who I refer to as kids. And the young adults, I had to teach them a task. And I would gather them together. I would communicate with them. I'd get their agreement. And then when they were supposed to do it, they would scatter off. They wouldn't do anything. And I'd see them again. And they would look at me like nothing's wrong. Like, and I was like flabbergasted. I was like, didn't we have this? Come on, like, what's going on? And no matter what I did, they wouldn't respond, and they acted like they were doing everything great, and it was very difficult for me. And then I noticed that there was this lady there, and it was very stressful for me. Like I felt like I I was failing. And there was this lady there who was constantly praying, and I didn't understand what her purpose was because everyone had a purpose there. And but it's not like I heard her words, but I felt this intense love coming from her. This kindness and compassion, and it was like the words were just a road under which this love would travel, and it like enabled me to keep on going. It really did. And then finally, I approached who appeared to be in charge. And I stood before them and I wanted to know what I was supposed to do, what I was supposed to learn. Like I didn't understand it. And it wasn't like you talked or you received answers. You just kind of like thought it and the answer would come to you. And I stood before this spirit who had such a bright aura. And I realized that I was standing before myself. not Stevie Weber here and now, but perhaps I was standing before my higher self. Perhaps part of you is always in spirit, and just part of you has a physical incarnation to learn and to grow. Because that if your higher self was put in that situation, they wouldn't make the same mistakes that you would make. And it's through those mistakes one's awareness grows. And I think that's really the key of physical life, that there's a continuation of consciousness because always part of you is in spirit. And when I stood before my higher self, I began to understand something, is that I received this grace. Like I couldn't see the experiences that my higher self had, but I kind of like felt a grace and understanding. It's kind of like intuition, like we have in a physical life, is that we can't remember any past life experience we had. I mean, in most circumstances, but but we can retain those lessons as intuition. And that's what I received, is like I received like this understanding. And then when I looked around at the kids, is that I didn't see like at first, I didn't see them as kids anymore. I saw them as spirits who were yet to have a human incarnation. And I was there to shepherd them into their first human incarnation. And I failed miserably because all I saw was a bunch of dopey kids. Is that I've gone through all of these things. I've gone through the understanding of being able to see and sense spirit in everybody and everything. I went through this life review where my awareness was raised so to a much higher level than it ever had been. And then when I'm put in a situation, all I saw was a bunch of dopey kids. And but once I had that understanding, like everything changed and I was able to help them. And the way that my higher self was to them, I was to be that reflection to them, that they were able to sense my understanding and my not my experiences, but what I learned from them. And they perhaps may have received that as their intuition as well. And um and that also taught me a very important lesson, is that perhaps your spirit isn't always in the current form, that your spirit grows through many different incarnations. And that is really the key to life, is to learn. And as your spirit grows, the consciousness of the creation grows. And I think that was the real message, which I was there to learn in that circumstance.
I'm so curious about when you saw your higher self. And did you recognize this higher self as you, or did it take a while for you to realize that, wow, that's me reflected?
Number 2. Is
Okay.
that is that well, what happened was, is that it wasn't looked like me or anything like
Yeah.
that. Is that all of a sudden I realized, like, the energy I was feeling, like, it thought like me. And and it was I felt like we knew people, like, but not in the here and now, like in a greater sense. Like I got these images and feelings that we were one. We were truly one. And that's what gave me that understanding of my higher self, is that there was something, that there was a connection there, but it wasn't like, oh, I feel a connection. No, it was like we had the same understanding. Like, if I were to think it through, is that perhaps there were spirits that were together, and that I was part of that, and now I could sense being part of that energy, that close energy. And that's what I felt.
It's so surreal to hear about because it's as someone who has not had a near death experience,
I
it's
don't recommend it.
yeah, so I've heard. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to envision because I feel like if I saw another physical body here on Earth, even if I felt akin to it, I just never would think that's also me. So it just makes me think about the power of being able to sense that energy.
But I have to tell you, neither would I. Neither would I. Again, I'm starting from a dead zero. Like these are all things like I had to learn. And if I was just put in that situation, I wouldn't have gotten it. I wouldn't have learned it. I had to have walked this path. And that was really the key, is that you have to have walked this path. Like, I couldn't read this in a book and be put in that situation to have that understanding. I had to walk the path and get the understanding.
Mhm. Okay. Wow. So I believe you had another experience, another lesson on the other side with your friends from Earth. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, I live in at the time, I lived in, a small town on the North Shore of Long Island. It's right outside, New York City, about 50 miles east or so of it, and it's where I grew up. It was my hometown, and, at the end of every day, we'd all go to the cliffs that overlook the Long Island Sound. We called it the Bluff, and, we would all at the end of the day, everyone a lot of people from town would go down there and watch the sunset together. Some people would drink coffee, other people would, be drinking from red Solo cups that wasn't coffee. And we'd talk about all the gossip in town, like who's doing who, and like those kind of things. And I found myself sitting with two friends of mine, Joe and John. They were both in their mid 70s, and I knew them from town. They were very good friends. I've known them for years. And Joey, he was a raconteur. He was a teller of tall tales, and he was an Irish guy who still spoke with a brogue. And I really enjoyed listening to his stories. And he was just a great guy, and he always had like a brightness about him. And he actually had a fusion in his spine because he had jumped in the water, dove in at the bluff in that very same spot, and had to have his spine fused together. And so he kind of like walked around like Frankenstein. And then John, he had diabetes, so he had a lot of infections in his leg, and he would he would do the readings in church, and when he would say things like, he had such a baritone voice, and he would say things like, "And Jesus said," and the place would shake. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little, but he had this great oratory quality about him, and he was a great guy too, and I really appreciated him a lot. So I'd watch the sunset with them over and over again. It just went on, and at first, like as usual, I didn't get what was going on, and over again, we'd watch the sunset, and then one time we were watching it together, I thought to myself, "Whoa, wait a second. Joey and John had both passed away earlier that year. Joe was hit by a car, and I imagine because he couldn't turn, he couldn't see the car, and so, he was hit by a car, and that was it for him. And then John, he had diabetes, and he died of a septic infection in his leg, and it just like I don't know, just like echoed in my mind, like over and over again, like they can't be here. Like all these strange things had been going on, but I don't know, in my own mind is that I didn't connect with me. I don't know, maybe I didn't want to know the answer, but I don't know. I was just dealing with situation after situation. I don't know why, but I just didn't question it up until this point. But when I saw Joey and John, I knew, wow, you're not in Kansas anymore. Like something's going on here. And it frightened me. And so that went on for quite a few more times. Is each time I sat with them, is I kept on running that over in my mind as we watched the sunset, and I wanted to know why they were here. Like, why am I sitting with them? Like, I had so many questions, but I really wanted to know why they were here. But for some reason, I didn't want to ask them. And then finally, the experience came that I felt that if I didn't ask them now, I would never get this opportunity to ask them again. And so finally, in my own mind, I made it known that I wanted to know why they were here. And the message that I received from them is that they're here to make sure I'm okay. I was fine. Like, I didn't understand what they meant by that. Like, I almost felt myself, internally like screaming, like, I am fine. Like I didn't know. And then what happened is when the sun was going down again, it just got brighter and brighter instead of dimming again. And I shielded my eyes. And then when I felt it was okay to open my eyes, I opened my eyes and I was in my hospital room. My mother was holding my hand and she was telling me that I'd been in a terrible motorcycle accident, but I was going to be all right.
Okay. What an experience. And I'm wondering about you were nervous about talking or asking Joey and John why they were here. Do you think part of that was because you were nervous about finding out why you were there?
I guess so. Like I wasn't entirely certain, not then, but now I look back at it is like, yes, I didn't want to know, like perhaps, you know, the obvious, yeah, I don't know because I was still alive. I was still it I still was clinging on to life. It wasn't that I was going to take this final step. And I think that's what it was reflected in me. That I think that that anxiety that I was feeling was that I was coming back to the here and now, that I was coming out of my coma. And that's why I felt that building of anxiety. And so at least that's the way I feel about it now. Although I could tell you with honesty, I'm not certain because it seems so obvious now. Like, how come you didn't want to know? I don't know.
This is a theory that I might have, and tell me if I'm totally off base, but it sounds like during all of these experiences, you weren't really thinking about how or why it was happening. You were just living in it in the present moment. And it sounds like that's a lesson I hear throughout all of the interviews I do is the importance of being in the present. And I wonder if that's maybe why you weren't questioning, maybe why you weren't sleeping or like walking around or all this. Do you think that might be
Absolutely.
on
Yeah,
right?
yeah. That's
Okay.
the closest thing as I could say is that
Okay.
I was just dealing with what was coming, and I guess in the same way that I wasn't doing other things, I wasn't questioning things. I was just going with the flow, and that's kind of like the way my overall personality was at that time. Is I just took things as they came. I had my good times, bad times, and some things I was upset with forever, but other things, I just didn't question things. I just dealt with what was in front of me, and that's the way I approached life at that time.
Yeah. Well, after your near-death experience, did you have any realizations about it, like, once you came back?
Well, at first it was very difficult because that, at least for the longest time, is that I didn't believe it was real. I believed that it was the drugs, that I imagined it. But then certain things started to happen. Like during my recovery, it was a tough thing. I had these tubes in my mouth and I was like tied down and I couldn't really move. But finally, when the tubes came out, my brother gave me my phone, and it was then I realized who that lady was who was praying all the time. It was my friend Kathy, this person who I knew. I say we were just friends, but that really doesn't, that just means we weren't intimate together. But we would go for long walks with our dogs. I first met her in this park. There's 300 acres, and so, in fact, the first time she saw me, I scared her. She crossed the street, and I used to call her Saint Kathy, and but I realized it was her, and I texted her right away, and I thanked her for visiting me when I was out, if you know what I mean. And she said that I heard her. I said, I heard your prayers, and they gave me such an energy. And it wasn't until later that I realized, as I'm looking on Facebook and social media and even my emails and my texts, is that she was gathering these people together for these prayer circles. And they were praying for me, and they were writing on the Facebook like, "Oh, Steve looked like he was coming back, but oh no, he took a turn for the worst. Oh, we have to pray harder." And that was going on. And what also I noticed is that some of the people, I was elected to the school board, and and some of the people who I had FU arguments with, they were the first to express like kindness and love for me. And that was the energy that I felt. It was true. I felt this intense energy. And it was from Kathy bringing all these people together. And that caused me a pause because, like, no, I was certain. I was certain that I was just certain that that lady was Kathy and that all these pieces started to come together. But as I was starting to go through my rehabilitation, is that is that I wanted to get better so badly. I really did. And I had like during rehab, I had this walker and I'd go around the hospital and the nurses, they would get so upset with me. They said that I was going to fall. And if I fell, they would get in such trouble. And I had to stay in my, but I wanted to keep on going. And I knew for certain if I just did these things, I would get better. And that was when I understood what Joey and Johnny said to me when when they said that they're here to make sure I was okay. They didn't mean there. They meant here. Because that Joe, he had a fused back. My back was all broken up. I have all these pins and rods and screws in my back. Who better to be my spirit guide than Joe? And then Johnny, he died of diabetes in his leg, and my leg was crushed. They weren't there. They were going to be my spirit guides, not my shields to prevent me from feeling pain or anguish. But when it came, it's like I got that intuition. I got the benefit of their experience, kind of like when the kids got the benefits of my experience through the intuition. I received the benefit of their experiences through my intuition, and that gave me the ability to really get better and really push myself. And so those were some of the first things that started to tell me that perhaps that I'm learning and that perhaps it wasn't the drugs, but it took a lot more than that to really get me to fully understand my experience and fully make sense of it.
Yeah, I love what you say about spirit guides not being spirit shields, not preventing the experience, the pain, the hurt, but perhaps guiding it so that you get the most out of it, are able to come out stronger. I think that's a really interesting lesson.
That's so true. I mean, it really is. And it all gets back to what we were sharing before is that they, these things are just words that people can tell you, oh, you got to do this, or you have to do this, or the physical therapist says this. It's just words. But when you have that wisdom, that knowledge, that intuition, that was really what drives you to learn and grow and be able to overcome these situations. And it's actually the pain, I mean, physical and emotional pain, that causes you to strive to learn and grow. And I think that's what their role was in my life.
Another realization you had as I was looking through your book, you talked about blue ethers and noted that they were consistent with your experience. Can you tell me about that?
Well, during my rehabilitation, as dumb luck may have it, is that I wanted to go to yoga, is that I had this experience and I was still coming to terms with it. And I wanted to be around people who had that same look in their eye, like of awareness. And I remember looking back at like the gurus in India, the way that they would look, and I would think like, yeah, yeah, I think they're onto it. So I went to a yoga studio, and it just happened to be a Kundalini yoga studio where it was very spiritual. We practiced yoga, but we studied spirituality. It was really like an MBA in spirituality. It really was. And and what I learned, the person who brought that practice to the United States was this man, Yogi Bhajan, and he was not a perfect person. He was not, but his words were real. And what he did is he talked about the death process, where you're not like I was mentioning. Perhaps it's not a switch that you go through these processes and to return into spirit. And he called them the five blue ethers. And some examples of them were very similar to what I went through. Is that first you sync with the Akashic record. Akashic record is perhaps the understanding and the awareness of the universe. You give what you've learned and you receive what you need to learn. And then the next thing is perhaps you undergo a life review. That you review your life and you come to understand your experiences. And then next you are tested on it. and to see where you are, whether or not perhaps you're going to have another physical incarnation, or you were to go to perhaps the next spiritual step, which would be kind of like a angel or a spirit guide. And that once you've done that, once you've done that, that that and you've successfully learned and grew from that experience, then the very next experience you would have would be at one with the creator. And those are very loosely my interpretation of those 5 steps. He referred to them as the blue east ethers, but I kind of think of it as steps of returning back into spirit. And that's what first kind of like attracted me to the study, is that I mean, I'm a Christian, but I'm like, I don't know how to explain it, but I'm like a many paths, one destination type Christian. It's like my Christianity is based upon where I lived and where I grew up. If I was born someplace else or lived someplace else, I would have a different religion, but the lessons would be the same, just the way that we learned about it. That's what I believe in that other place, is that I learned it in a way that I needed to learn it for myself from who I was. Somebody growing up in Tanzania or some other place, they would have had different experiences to learn those lessons, but I believe that the lessons would have what you're going to learn would have been the same. And so that was my understanding of the blue ethers, and that really started to really get my attention, because that it wasn't exactly what I was experiencing, but it wasn't exactly, but it smelled so familiar to me. It really did.
Yeah, and you speak about Christianity, and one of your chapters in your book is about there not being one central religion. And your book, you also refer to Jesus, and I believe it's a story where you tell a woman you were just, it came from you to say that Jesus sent you to help her.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, do you think that the lesson about one central religion conflicts with Jesus, or do you think that Jesus is for everybody?
Well, number two.
Yeah.
But but Jesus to me is another figure to somebody else. It's a consciousness, and I
Mhm.
kind of refer to it as the Christ consciousness. And so people have a different way of understanding these things. So I may say Jesus, someone else may say Yahweh, or it's not all faiths or all theologies, but so many of them, they're a commonness, and they've all grown up in different areas. And so the fact that there is a similarity really tells me, at least shares with me, that no, there is an understanding that people, no matter where you live, no matter where you grow up, is that you have that understanding of not only that guide, Jesus perhaps being the ultimate guide, but it's a pathway to what I believe is that energy that we all share, that creative, that consciousness. And I believe that's the Holy Spirit. And that's what I, at least, well, what I've learned and what I got out of the experience.
I love hearing messages like that that unite people across different countries, religions, just everything like that. So I love to hear that. And I know one of the main lessons that you learned about was that of forgiveness. And I'm wondering if you can tell me about how that was cemented after your near death experience.
Well, what had happened is that my friend Kathy, she punches like a man. I mean, she is an athlete, and
Okay.
so she would it wasn't just about walking the dogs anymore. She would take me on long walks, and she was halfway between Mother Teresa and Sergeant Slaughter. She would really push me really hard, but be so kind and loving in other ways. And so I would spend a lot of time walking with her and learning with her. But what happened is my son, he died of a drug overdose. A 20-year-old boy who was just a marvelous musician. He played the piano, the saxophone, the guitar. He was a great scholar, and he was on a Division I scholarship to is a wrestling champion to a D1 engineering school, and he just got in bad company, and he was experimenting. It wasn't like a long thing. He was just a risk taker, and he died. And it was just such a
So sorry.
thank you, thank you. It's something that a club no parent wants to be part of, and it was such a devastating thing for me, and that's when those walks with Kathy took on a whole new meaning, it really did, and didn't ask me too much, but she let me talk when I would talk, and every once in a while, like, I was starting to think more and more about the place between here and there, and I was starting to come away from perhaps it wasn't the drugs, perhaps it was an experience that I had to receive. And I would crack jokes about it, and Kathy, she wouldn't laugh. Well, like, there'll be funny jokes, and I'd crack little funny snippets about the place between here and there, and finally, one day she said to me, "Stephen, it's not funny. It's like, you had this experience for a reason. You were going to have this terrible, terrible thing happen to you, and that is what you learned there is gonna carry you through, and you have to start thinking about that and realizing that." And I don't know, that kinda stuck with me, and then what happened shortly after that, my cousin, she went to a medium, and the medium asked if she went there to connect with her grandmother, but asked if my son Nick wanted to come through, if that was okay. And the medium said that Nick has been trying to communicate with his father, but he wouldn't listen. And he has a synchronicity with Saint Teresa, the little flower she's known as. And he's been sending roses. And have we been seeing roses? And we had been seeing roses all over the place. Like we'd be hanging in the middle of the wood, there'd be a bouquet of roses there. And Kathy would say to me, she'd say, "Oh, see, someone's sending us a message." I knew what she meant by somebody, but I thought it was silly. Like, what is it, like a Star Trek transporter? Like all of a sudden they transport roses here? And she would say, "No, it's that people are there for their own reasons, and they're there for their own path, and our paths are crossing with them for this moment. And that's the way spirit works with these things. They don't materialize things, but they put people on certain paths where they're going to cross and communicate. And that's how they bring these messages together." And I don't know. I just wasn't, I don't know. I just couldn't let it go. And and so one day we're walking in the woods, and Kathy she brought a little statue of Saint Teresa with her, Saint Kathy, I used to call her. And we put it down by this tree, and she brought magic markers and in a knapsack, a whole bunch of flat rocks. And she wrote messages, prayers on the rocks, and she gave it to me. And we said a prayer together. And I let Kathy do most of the praying for both of us at that time. And we left the magic marker there. And then when we came back, like several weeks later, there were like 100 rocks there with all prayers on them. And people had picked up the magic marker and had wrote on them. And it was then I realized, like, it wasn't like everyone has problems. It was like we're all in this world together, that people have these experiences. Parents have lost kids before throughout all of history, and it's through our love for each other and our support of each other that we make us through these things. It's not like, oh, everyone has problems and that's why mine is insignificant. It's the exact opposite. It's that we're all in this life, this existence together. And that's what I learned from the place between here and there, that each one of us has our own unique energy, but we're all part of a greater energy. But that it wasn't the oddest part about it is that she also had a mass card of Saint Teresa. And I'm looking on the back of the card, and it said Saint Teresa's birthday. That was the same birthday my son has. And then very same birthday my son has. And then I looked at the day she was canonized. That's a day where a saint is recognized by the church as a saint. That was the same day that my son passed.
Oh.
And I'm looking at it, and it's like, and Kathy's like, "I told you so," you know. but I'm looking at it, and like, it was so shocking to me. Like, I'm a computer guy and all, and how does that happen? I mean, really, how does that happen? And so that night I had this dream that my son had come to me in a dream, and like everything was okay. And like nothing really happened. At least that's not the impression that I got. And then I woke up and I realized, no, all this did happen. But all of a sudden, the grief, not all of it, but the biting part of the grief was lifted from me because all of a sudden I saw my son, he was okay. And I knew he was in the place between here and there, and that he was learning and growing and having these experiences. And I loved that place. It was a place of bliss for me. And I didn't have a choice of whether I came back or not. But obviously he wasn't coming back and he would go on to that next step. And perhaps the next time I would meet him is that we would be in our higher selves and all of this would make sense, just as my life review made sense. And that brought me such a peace. But what was yet to come was that they caught the fellow who sold my son the drugs. I had cameras outside the house. And my son didn't have a long history of drug abuse, and he had no other drugs in his system besides the ones that killed him. And and they built this federal case against this drug dealer. And so they were putting him on trial. And I dig deep down in my heart for hatred because I wanted to really let him know how I felt about him and what he did to my son and also other people. No one else died from the drugs he was selling, but many lives were ruined and several people were hospitalized. And I wanted that kid to know exactly what I felt and what I missed out on in life and how much effort I put into my children. I was a stay-at-home dad, after having, I changed my life after having that first experience of the wrong way driver. And I became so focused on my children. I even ran for school board and won. I was so wrapped up into my local community and and but now I was ready. I was ready. So I went for to that trial and I was all ready to glare at him and let him know how I felt. But once I saw him, all I did was see a drug addicted kid. He didn't mean any of this. It doesn't take away from the terrible things that he did and the terrible choices that he's made. And I understand that he has to be held responsible for those things. But not on my account, is that we already had one life that was wasted. And when I look at him, and he had no malice in his heart, just like the kid in the first situation, he just did a terrible thing that he didn't intend. And he was addicted to drugs, and it affected his whole state of being. And it might sound so awful to some people, but I felt love for this kid. I just wanted things to be better for him. I wanted him to someday, I wanted him to serve his time honorably and then someday get out of prison, young enough to still have a family of his own, to have his own, to have his own son and be able to go to like wrestling and band practice and perhaps go to his wedding someday and sometimes to have grandchildren. I wanted him to have those things. And that's what I felt for him. And now I look back at the whole thing and the life review. I don't recall like a lot of details from the life review besides my impressions and the things that some things really stick out to me, but that must have been part of my life review. And I learned from those experiences. I learned from the heartbreak of the family who lost their daughter and how gravely they were injured. And I understood that heartbreak. And then I understood that young fellow who just did this terrible thing by driving the wrong way. And I had to balance those two things out. And that caused me a lot of angst, but I'm sure I settled it out in that life review. So when I was put in that situation, I had everything I needed to see things clearly. And I unconditionally forgave him, but not because I'm a virtuous person, because I'm not. It was that based upon what I knew, what I learned, there was nothing else to do, was to forgive him because it would just be building another blockage for me. And it wasn't even about that. It was the only thing that was left to do. And that's what I learned about forgiveness in that place, is that all of those things that I experienced through that whole situation funny, starting with the courtroom and ending in another courtroom, it was all linked. Like I never had the impression like there was a hand guiding things, but this all fits together so well. Like how does that happen? Is this all coincidence? I just don't know. I'm still coming to terms with that. And that's how I live my life every day, just trying to live, learn, and grow, and to get that understanding, and to forgive and to love. Because I really do believe that love is the most intelligence. Because by showing him that love, that was intelligent love. That was love that I learned through all of my experiences. The warm and fuzziest part of love is just the doorway. It is that understanding that brings a greater love.
Oh, I know you say you're not a virtuous person, but that is truly the ultimate forgiveness. I mean, I have to it's so honorable and it's humbling to hear about, honestly. I know
I'm a
you say
hypocrite.
else.
I'm a pleasure maximizing unit. Don't believe that. I'm not virtuous.
Well, regardless, I know that people can learn from
Yeah.
this story.
I'm teasing you.
I wonder, do you think this is probably not the right question to be asking for on a spiritual centered podcast, but forget about the spiritual side of it. Do you think that your earthly life has benefited from you forgiving that that kid?
Of course. Yeah, if I understand the intention behind your question is that it makes my life better. It does. And and when I say love is the ultimate intelligence, it is because that I could say, "Oh, I just love everybody." And that's wonderful. But it was that wisdom and that knowledge that I experienced gave me that love and that understanding. And it wasn't because I'm so forgiving. It was because of that wise love that I received that I was able to forgive. And that's the way it's reflected in my life today. Is that when I take a look at these things, sometimes it's tough. It really is. But it makes me be able to get more out of this life and more of this understanding, because in many ways I'm very happy now. And although, it's like a spiritual garden, you got to weed it. If you don't weed it, it gets out of hand. So sometimes I don't weed as often as I should. But no, it does. And it enables me to get so much more out of life. And I've also learned that's why spiritualists don't make good politicians, because that, there are greater society needs, and everyone that's walking around isn't perhaps as spiritual aware emotionally or spiritually as I'd like to think I am and other people are. So there's certain facts that people have to deal with. But in my life, in the here and now, no, it makes me be able to get much more understanding, satisfaction, and yes, pleasure out of life, to be able to forgive everyone, including myself.
Yeah, yes. There's so many different perspectives to look at a lot of the lessons that are shared on this channel, like scientifically, spiritually, like from an earthly perspective. And often they don't conflict, like they resonate regardless of the perspective you look at. So I just love to investigate things from different angles like that. Is there anything else you think I should be asking before
Well,
wrapping up?
yes, yes. I'd like to share a couple stories that really help me put things into perspective. Is that it was very difficult for me to talk about this experience with others. I shared it with Kathy and my sister and maybe a few other close people, but not like I shared with Kathy. That was very intense, and she was kind of like I was her spiritual project.
Yeah.
When I first had it was very difficult for me to speak about it. And so I was going to the yoga studio, and there was this lady there, this nice lady, name was Nancy. She was almost 90 years old, and she practiced yoga with the rest of us. I mean, she was an incredible lady. Sometimes she would teach the gathering, and she would sit there with her legs up in the air before the practice and start talking to people and just rattle on for 15 minutes. And I couldn't even do it for 1 minute. And she would like nothing's going on. And she was just an incredible person. And we wanted to go to this spiritual yoga festival. Everyone was going, but she couldn't go because she was on a fixed income and she really struggled day to day. And and so Kathy got the idea to she said, you know, Stephen, why don't you tell your story about the place between here and there? Everyone would be interested in it, and we could charge $20 a head, and we could give the money to Nancy so she can go to the yoga festival. I was a little reluctant, but I love Nancy, and Kathy kind of shamed me into it in the way. She's very persuasive, and um, and so I agreed to it. I got one of my friends, Sean. He played the guitar, and sometimes I would jam with him. And I asked him to come and play at this presentation. And one of the ladies from the yoga studio, I always heard her singing along. She sang like a bird, and so I wanted her to sing with Sean. And so what I did is I put together this gathering where I'd tell a little bit of the story, then they'd play a song and sing it, and everyone would sing along, but they're all songs that we knew from our yoga practice. And it was great. It was really a great thing. Well, what had happened was is several weeks before I was receiving emails from this lady who I knew from town. I mean, I knew of her from town, and and I used to at one, this great lady. She was like a hockey skating coach of some type, and and my buddy Sean, he was actually a hockey player, and and he told me the coach's name, and it was the same lady who was emailing me. Her son had died recently, so I knew why she was emailing me, and I didn't respond back to her because I just wasn't ready for it. I just didn't want to have that conversation right now. This is very early on in coming to terms with things. And and so I told Sean, I said, Sean, why don't you invite her to the presentation? And, maybe she'll get something out of it, and maybe I'll talk to her afterwards and such. And and he said, okay. And then, like the morning of the presentation, I get a call. I pick up the phone, and this lady's on the phone, and she says, hello, is this Stevie Weber? And I said, yeah, is this Barbara Williams? And she said, yes, how'd you know it was me? I said, I remember all those times we used to sit in the hockey stands and we used to watch the hockey, and you would tell me all about your life and how you taught all these hockey players how to skate. Like before that time, you told me that they really didn't concentrate on that. They concentrate on elbows up and strategy and things like that. And it's better to skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it's been. And like she would teach them those types of things. And it was something she was very proud of. And I remember sitting at the games, and she's also a very religious person as well. And so I really enjoyed talking to her. And I told her that, but for the life of me, I can't remember what games we sat at. I don't even like hockey, I mean, I like sports in general, but I couldn't fathom me going to a hockey game with anybody, especially all the times we went together. And she said to me, we never went to any hockey game together. I said, of course we did. She said, no. She said, when you were in the hospital in the coma, my son was in the very next room to you. And after I was done seeing my son, I would come over to your room, and I would hold your hand, and I would say the Lord's Prayer to you, and I would tell you all about my life. So, you know, and what I learned from that is that there's spiritual things and physical things and reasons and experiences. And so, one thing I learned from that is that if someone is sick and ill, even if they don't seem to respond, pray for them in the way that Kathy did, but also hold their hand and talk to them. Tell them about your life. Tell them how you feel about them. Tell them about the things you want to tell them, or tell them about the things you feel you need to tell them. You may never have that opportunity again. And that was a very important story I wanted to share. And then the next story I want to share is about coincidences, because I shared with you all these experiences and how I thought to myself, can these be coincidences, or is there some hand at play here? And what I began to learn is I began to learn about signs and synchronicities, and about having a like you see a sign from grandma, and you're like, oh, there's a butterfly or a hummingbird, and I know that's from grandma, and she's speaking to me. For me, no. You have to find out why you're receiving that message. That is critical because it's like a signpost. It's like Joey and Johnny communicating to me in the way that they did, is that you have to be open to signs and synchronicities. So my advice is not to get all excited like I see a sign, is to try to figure out why you're receiving this sign. When Kathy and I were writing the first book, The Place Between Here and There, is that it was during that health crisis that we're all facing as a world. And we would go out on the beach. You were allowed to go on the beach then, and we would walk along the beach. And Kathy, Saint Kathy, she was always praying to hope that things would be better for the planet. She sets her sights high, and she was praying to a Saint Germain. He's known as the Violet Flame, and so we would walk along the beach looking for beach glass. And Kathy wanted to find violet beach glass because she wanted a sign that Saint Germain is hearing her prayers. And you will not find violet beach glass on the beaches of Long Island. You'll find plenty of old Heineken bottles and Budweiser, maybe a few Noxema broken glasses, but you will not find violet beach glass. And so as we're walking back, I can see Kathy has a pouty face on. And so I'm trying to think of something, sweet to tell her to make her feel better and that Saint Germain is really listening to her. And then right from behind the sand dunes, this Dalmatian dog comes running out to us, and Dalmatian dog, it's white with black spots all over it. And it's jumping all over. It's a little puppy, and I'm wrestling with it and pulling its ears and mushing its face and just having a good old time with it. And the owner, this lady, comes from running behind the sand dunes, and she said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." It was just probably taking a pee or something. And she's saying I'm like, "No, no, I love dogs." We chatted for a bit, and finally I asked what the dog's name was.
No way.
Violet.
Violet?
Yes.
Oh my
She said the dog's
gosh.
name is Violet. And so I was like, and so we're walking away, and Kathy still has a pouty face on. I'm like, "Kathy, the dog's name is Violet." And she finally got it. And I told her, no, I said, no, I knew now, like, no, we have to get to the bottom of this. I have to find out why. She says it's a sign. I say, I know it's a sign, but there's a reason why we're seeing this sign. And so we walk there every day. And a few weeks later, we see the lady again. The puppy's there, and the puppy remembered us. And so I'm chatting with her, and Kathy's chatting with her. And I asked her, like, how does a Dalmatian get to be Violet? And she said that her and her son, they used to watch when he was a little boy, before he grew into a teenager. They would watch Gone with the Wind together. And Scarlett O'Hara, one of the main characters, I think she received like this dress from Brett Butler, and I think it was a violet dress. And they loved the movie, so she wanted to remember that, and so she named the dog Violet after the dress, but she spelt it the way Scarlett spells her name, not the way that the color is spelled. And then she told me that her son passed away, and that this was the dog she got after that. And that's why she named the dog Violet. How's that happen? Like, like we began to talk, and we became very good friends over that time period. And we shared our experiences about our children and what had happened and about their passing. And we came to terms with so many things together. And and without meeting her, I don't think things would have went as well as they did for my life after that, and helped me get a basic understanding. And like, how does that happen? Is that by accident? And I'm thinking, no, that's no coincidence. All those things, just like the mask card, was no coincidence. I believe that her son and my son together brought us together to have that experience, to be able to meet each other and share and grow during that very tense little time that the whole world was experiencing. And so that's what I would like to share with people, is look for those signs and synchronicities in your life. And they may they may bring you some peace and give you some guidance at the same time.
I love hearing these stories, the stories that cannot be coincidences, and it has to be coordinated, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And I love that, your sons are like, both yours and her son are looking out for us, and it just makes me very happy because I think, how can there not be forces at play? How can we not be looked after? Like, we're not alone here. It's such a beautiful message,
It
so thank
is.
you for sharing.
And there's something else beside what we look and feel and see, that we're part of a greater thing, and it's a beautiful thing. And the real goal is to get as many as experiences out of life as you can. It's the only thing that you take with you. And if I was a guru and I sat on the mountain all day going home from sunup to sunrise, that may be someone's purpose in life. But really, if I didn't have all these life experiences to have in my life review, I wouldn't have learned and grow. So you have to be out there, in my opinion, to have new experiences, to learn and to grow, to laugh and to cry and to face all these things and to get pleasure and get sadness, all the things that life has to offer, because they will serve you well in this world and any other world that comes after.
That's amazing advice, amazing advice. And I'm wanting to ask, um, how viewers of this video can hear more from you, read your book,
Sure.
and get in touch if need be.
Well, could I do a shameless promotional plug? I have
That's
I
this is the time,
I
this
have
is the
my
time.
my 2 books here. This is Lessons Learned Between Here and There and The Place Between Here and There. The first book, The Place Between Here and There, tells all about the near-death experience. And then the Lessons Learned book, shares with many of the things that we've learned today, that I've shared about all the different lessons I learned about forgiveness, and love is the most imp the m best intelligent the most intelligent thing, intelligent love. Learn about there's many paths, one destination, that there's no one central religion. All these things that we talked about are all in the Lessons Learned book, and those are available on Amazon. But if you just go to my website, it's called betweenhereandthere.org, not .com, .org, betweenhereandthere.org, and I have links for the books, as well as some videos and contact information, my email address, social media, and other things. So it's betweenhereandthere.org, and that's the best way to get in contact with me. But also, if they comment on this video, I watch all the comments, I read them all, and I respond to anyone who's asking a response of some type. And I spent a lot of time thinking about it. So if you have something to share, or if you want to ask me a question, I really don't give advice. I give advice, but I would share with you perhaps what I would do in that situation, or perhaps what happened to me. And so I really enjoy connecting with people. And so if you would like to comment, I would be glad to respond to you. And those are the best ways to get in contact with me, not only through my website, but also through commenting on this video.
Awesome. Well, I will absolutely be including those links in the video description and be looking out in the comments section. I love the conversations that people have in there, so I think that's awesome. I'm excited to see you there.
I would like to share one last thing with your audience, if you don't
Please
mind,
do.
is that what I've learned from this experience, and what I'd like to share is that life is good and people are good, even when very sad things happen, that these are just words. But if you can take the time to understand them yourself and run them through your life and through your understanding, and make them your own, you will find peace in this world or any other world that comes afterwards. And I believe that. And so consider it.
I love it. Thank you so much. Thank you for your insightful messages, for all of your time, and for sharing your story. I'm very grateful, so thank you so much.
Thank you. You're welcome. Satnam, and keep the mission.